Certified incident briefings. Real video evidence. Strict accountability. You are viewing Bodycam incident reports.
Out of the car! Hands on the roof! You don't belong here! I'm a federal employee. My credentials are on the dash. Anyone can fake a badge. You fit the profile. You have no probable cause. You're violating federal law. Save it, boy. You're detained. Check my pocket.
At 10:45 p.m., under the harsh, buzzing halogen lights of a secure federal parking lot just outside Arlington, Virginia, a veteran police officer made a decision based on a silhouette he saw in a darkened sedan, a skin color he weaponized, and an assumption that would dismantle his entire life. His chest-mounted body camera was blinking red, capturing every sneer, every violation of protocol, every ounce of unearned arrogance. He had no idea that the man he was screaming at, a man calmly sitting in an Audi A8 with government plates, was not a lookout. He was not a foreign asset. He was Julian Vance, a senior intelligence officer for the Defense Intelligence Agency, a man who held a top-secret SCI clearance, a former Marine Force recon captain and the newly appointed chief of counterintelligence for the Northeast Sector. Officer Garrett Thorne had absolutely no idea that the suspect he was threatening to drag out of the car had just finished a 14-hour shift briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he certainly didn't know that his body camera footage would eventually be played before a Senate Judiciary Committee dissected by the Department of Justice and serve as the catalyst for the most sweeping reform of police qualified immunity in Virginia state history. Before we dive into the nightmare that unfolded that Tuesday night, if you believe that a badge should be a symbol of protection rather than a license to harass, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This story is going to expose exactly what happens when local prejudice tries to bully federal authority. And drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because the abuse of power we saw in Arlington isn't just a local problem, it's an American crisis. Julian Vance, 42 years old, held a dual Ph.D. in International Relations and Strategic Intelligence from Georgetown University. With 20 years of service to the United States government, he was a man who had survived IED blasts in Fallujah and navigated the treacherous political landscapes of Washington, D.C. with equal precision. On that humid June evening, Julian was exhausted. He was sitting in his car in the outer lot of the DIA Annex, a nondescript building that housed some of the nation's most sensitive data. He wasn't driving. The engine was off. He was simply taking 5 minutes to decompress, listening to jazz, letting the adrenaline of a high-stakes briefing fade before making the commute home to his wife and 2 daughters in Alexandria. He had learned a long time ago, growing up in Chicago and rising through the ranks of the military, that excellence was his only armor. As a black man in the intelligence community, a field overwhelmingly dominated by white Ivy League graduates, Julian knew he had to be sharper, faster, and more disciplined than anyone else in the room just to be considered equal. He drove a modest but nice car. He wore bespoke suits not out of vanity, but out of necessity. In his world, appearance was currency. But to Officer Garrett Thorne, patrolling the perimeter of the federal zone, Julian Vance wasn't a patriot or a high-ranking official. He was just a suspect. A black male in a luxury vehicle sitting in the dark. In Thorne's mind, that equation only had one solution: criminality. The patrol car didn't use its siren. It just slid up silently behind Julian's Audi, blocking him in. Then came the spotlight. A blinding beam of white light flooding the rearview mirror, shattering Julian's moment of peace. Julian didn't panic. He didn't flinch. His training kicked in instantly. Assess the threat. Secure the environment. He knew he was on federal property, specifically the Outer Rim jurisdiction, where local PD had concurrent patrol rights but limited authority over federal personnel. He checked his side mirrors. One officer. Aggressive posture. Officer Thorne sat in his cruiser for a solid 4 minutes. This is a tactic known as baking the suspect. It's designed to induce anxiety, to make the driver sweat, to force them to make a furtive movement that justifies an escalation. Julian knew the game. He placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, lowered his window, and waited. He kept his breathing rhythmic. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. When Thorne finally approached, he didn't walk to the window. He stood at the B-pillar, creating a tactical disadvantage for Julian, forcing him to crane his neck to see the officer. "License and proof of ownership," Thorne barked. No good evening, no officer, just a demand. "Good evening, officer." Julian said, his voice a deep, controlled baritone. "I am retrieving my wallet from my breast pocket. My credentials are legally displayed on the dashboard." "I didn't ask for a life story. I asked for your license. And step out of the car." "Officer, I am on federal property. I have identified myself as an employee of this facility. May I ask the reason for this detention?" "You're loitering in a high-security zone. We've had reports of drug activity and copper theft in this industrial park, and frankly, you fit the description." Julian paused. The description. The area was an industrial zone populated by defense contractors. There was no description of copper thieves that matched a man in a 3-piece Brooks Brothers suit sitting in an $80,000 sedan. "I am a senior intelligence officer," Julian stated, clearly looking straight ahead. "I just exited the building. I am not loitering. I am preparing to commute. If you look at the placard on my dashboard, you will see a Department of Defense Level 5 access pass." Thorne laughed. It was a dry, cruel sound. "Anyone can print a laminate at Kinko's, buddy. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know a spotter when I see one? You're sitting here waiting for a drop. Probably fentanyl. That's what's moving through here lately. There are no drugs in this vehicle. There is no criminal activity. You are harassing a federal agent." "Agent?" Thorne scoffed. He leaned down his face, inches from the window, the smell of stale coffee and aggression wafting in. "You ain't no agent. You look like the guy who washes the agent's cars. Now I'm going to tell you one more time. Get out of the vehicle or I will drag you out." This was the pivot point. The moment where a routine interaction turns into a life-altering event. Julian knew the law better than Thorne ever would. He knew Pennsylvania versus Mims. He knew Terry v. Ohio. He knew that Thorne had no articulable, reasonable suspicion. But he also knew the reality of being a black man in America. If he moved too fast, if he reached for his phone, if he showed even a flicker of irritation, Thorne would shoot. And the report would say Julian reached for a weapon. "I am complying," Julian said loud enough for the body camera he knew was recording. "I am unbuckling my seatbelt. I am opening the door. I am stepping out." Julian rose to his full height, 6'3", broad-shouldered. He towered over Thorne. The officer took an instinctive step back, his hand dropping to the grip of his service weapon. The fear in Thorne's eyes was instantaneous, quickly masked by rage. He hated that this man was bigger than him. He hated that this man was calmer than him. "Turn around! Hands on the roof!" Thorne screamed, his voice cracking. "I am not under arrest," Julian said, keeping his hands visible but not turning his back. "I am voluntarily exiting to clear up your confusion. My federal credentials are in my jacket pocket. I am going to reach for them slowly." "Don't you reach for nothing, spread 'em." Thorne kicked Julian's legs apart. It was an assault, plain and simple. He slammed Julian's chest against the hot metal of the car roof. "You're resisting," Thorne yelled for the benefit of the recording. "I am standing perfectly still," Julian replied, his face pressed against the roof of his own car. "You are violating Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code, deprivation of rights under color of law. You are currently assaulting a federal officer." "Shut up! You smell like weed. I knew it. I can smell it on your clothes." It was the oldest lie in the book. Julian didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He was a marathon runner who treated his body like a temple. But the odor of marijuana was the magic key that unlocked probable cause, allowed searches, and justified force. "That is a lie," Julian said, his voice vibrating against the metal. "And when the toxicology report comes back clean and when your supervisor reviews this footage, that lie will end your career." "You threatening me, boy?" Thorne hissed. Boy. The word hung in the humid air like a toxic cloud. It stripped away the suit, the degrees, the rank, the service. In Thorne's eyes, Julian was just property. Thorne grabbed Julian's wrists and twisted them behind his back, clicking the handcuffs tight, too tight. The metal bit into the skin. Thorne spun him around and shoved him against the B-pillar. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and suspicion of possession of a controlled substance." "Check my pocket," Julian said, staring directly into the lens of the body camera. "Left breast pocket. Leather wallet. Open it." Thorne sneered. He reached into the pristine suit jacket, fishing out the wallet. He flipped it open, expecting a driver's license, maybe a fake ID. What he saw made the color drain from his face. It wasn't just a badge. It was a heavy gold-shielded credential set from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Below it was a Common Access Card CAC with a red stripe indicating TSSCI clearance. And behind that, a folded letter of authorization from the Department of Defense. Thorne stared at it. He looked at the photo. He looked at Julian. He looked back at the badge. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the distant hum of the highway, the chirping of crickets, and the slow, sinking realization of a man who had just made a catastrophic error. "Dispatch." Thorne's voice wavered as he keyed his radio. Run a verify on a federal ID." He read the numbers. 30 seconds later, the dispatcher's voice came back urgent and sharp. "Unit 4 Alpha, be advised. That ID flags as Priority 1. DOD alert status. Supervisor is en route. Hold position. Do not, I repeat, do not engage further." Thorne lowered the radio. His hand trembled slightly. "Uncuff me," Julian said. It wasn't a request. It was an order given with the weight of the entire United States military behind it. I need to wait for my sergeant," Thorne stammered, trying to regain some footing. Procedure says you do not detain a federal intelligence officer without a warrant signed by a federal judge." Julian interrupted. "Uncuff me, now." Sergeant Miller arrived 4 minutes later. He didn't come alone. 2 military police SUVs from the base rolled up simultaneously, blue and red lights flashing, flanked by a black government Suburban. The scene that followed was a study in contrasts. The military police officers, young and disciplined, took up positions around Julian's car. A man in a suit, Julian's deputy, stepped out of the Suburban. Sergeant Miller, a man who looked like he carried the weight of 1,000 bad shifts, walked up to Thorne. He took one look at Julian, still in handcuffs, then looked at the credentials in Thorne's hand. He looked at the gathering crowd of federal agents. He closed his eyes and exhaled a long, painful breath. "Get those cuffs off him, Thorne," Miller said quietly. "Sarge, he was acting suspicious. He smelled like—" "Take the cuffs off him," Miller roared. "Are you out of your mind? That's the section chief." Thorne fumbled with the key. The cuffs clicked open. Julian rubbed his wrists. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply adjusted his cufflinks, straightened his tie, and picked up his wallet from where Thorne had dropped it on the hood. "Sergeant," Julian said, turning to Miller, "I want your officer's badge number. I want his name, and I want the incident report number immediately." "Sir, we can resolve this," Miller began, using his de-escalation voice. "Officer Thorne is zealous. He's vigilant. The lighting out here is bad. Maybe it was a misunderstanding." "He called me boy," Julian said. The temperature in the parking lot seemed to drop 10 degrees. "He fabricated a smell of narcotics. He assaulted me. He detained a federal asset without cause. And he did it because he saw a black man in a car he didn't think I could afford." Julian stepped closer to Miller. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a targeted harassment campaign, and I am going to burn it to the ground, legally." Julian didn't go home. He went back inside the secure facility. He went to his office, sat down at his secure terminal, and began to type. He wrote a memorandum for the record MFR. In the intelligence world, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. He documented everything, the timestamps, the exact verbiage, the physical sensations, the lighting conditions. He saved the security footage from the gate cameras which had captured the entire interaction from a high angle. By 3:00 a.m., he had a 12-page dossier. By 7:00 a.m., he had contacted the Inspector General of the Department of Defense. By 8:00 a.m., he was on the phone with Elena Ross, one of the most feared civil rights attorneys in Washington, D.C. "They're going to try to bury it," Elena told him. "They'll claim qualified immunity. They'll say he made a reasonable mistake of fact. They'll say he was acting in the interest of national security by checking a suspicious vehicle." "Let them try," Julian said. "I have the gate footage, and I'm going to subpoena his body cam. Elena, he turned off his audio for the first 30 seconds, but the buffer captured the video. You can see him mouthing the words." "What words?" He looked at his partner, who wasn't even out of the car yet, and said, "Watch me spook this spook." It's a double entendre, a racial slur and a slang term for a spy. He knew exactly what he was doing. The complaint hit the Arlington Police Department like a tactical nuke, but as expected, the blue wall of silence went up immediately. The initial Internal Affairs report released 2 weeks later was a whitewash. It concluded that Officer Thorne had acted within policy guidelines regarding suspicious vehicles near sensitive infrastructure. It recommended a verbal counseling for the use of informal language, referring to the word boy. That was the spark Julian needed. He didn't just sue Officer Thorne. He sued the entire department, Vance v. Arlington PD. And because of his clearance and connections, the FBI's Civil Rights Division opened a parallel investigation. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was where the skeletons came dancing out of the closet. Elena Ross requested the data on every stop Officer Thorne had made in the last 3 years. The numbers were staggering. 842 total stops. 76% of drivers were black or Hispanic. 90% of his stops occurred on the border of the wealthy, predominantly white neighborhoods and the working-class districts, and most damningly, only 12% resulted in a citation. The rest were warnings or field interviews. This meant Thorne was stopping people, harassing them, running their IDs to check for warrants, and then cutting them loose when he found nothing. It was a fishing expedition, a dragnet designed to catch the poor and the marginalized. But the most damning evidence came from the audio logs of Thorne's in-car computer. The FBI forensics team recovered deleted chat logs between Thorne and other officers. Log entry, May 12th. "Got another one in a Benz, probably a drug runner or a rapper. Gonna shake him down." Log entry, June 2nd. "These diversity hires at the Fed building think they own the place. Need to remind them whose streets these are." The intent was undeniable. This wasn't policing, it was gatekeeping. Thorne viewed himself as the protector of the good neighborhoods against the encroachment of people he deemed undesirable. 6 months later, Officer Thorne sat across a mahogany table from Elena Ross. He was out of uniform, wearing an ill-fitting suit, looking smaller than he had that night in the parking lot. His union lawyer sat next to him, looking bored. "Officer Thorne," Elena began, her voice deceptively sweet. "In your report you stated that Mr. Vance smelled of marijuana." "Correct." "Yes, ma'am. Strong odor." "Interesting. Because we have the toxicology report from the DIA taken 1 hour after the incident, mandatory for all agents involved in legal disputes. It was clean, 0 traces. We also have the affidavits from 3 other officers on the scene who stated they smelled nothing. Were they lying?" I smelled what I smelled. Maybe it was skunk. Maybe it was coming from outside." "The windows were up until you tapped on them. You stated the smell came from the vehicle, and you used that smell as probable cause to lay hands on a federal official. Do you often fabricate evidence to justify your aggression?" "I object to the word fabricate," the union lawyer barked. Elena ignored him. She slid a piece of paper across the table. "This is a transcript of your body cam footage from a stop 2 months prior, a Ms. Sarah Jenkins. You told her she smelled like alcohol. Breathalyzer was 0.00. You searched her car anyway. Found nothing. Is this your standard operating procedure, to hallucinate odors so you can violate the Fourth Amendment? Thorne stayed silent. His jaw worked, grinding his teeth. Let's talk about the word boy, Elena continued. You called a 42-year-old man a PhD a senior government official boy. Why? It's just a figure of speech, like buddy or pal. Is it? We analyzed your body cam footage for the last year. You used the word buddy 412 times almost exclusively with white drivers. You used the word boy 67 times. Every single time the driver was black. That's not a figure of speech, Officer Thorne. That is a racial epithet disguised as casual language, and you know it. Thorne looked at the camera recording the deposition. He looked at Julian, who was sitting silently in the corner watching with the cold, analytical gaze of a man who hunted terrorists for a living. Thorne realized then that he wasn't fighting a criminal. He was fighting a system that he could no longer manipulate. The city of Arlington saw the writing on the wall. The chat logs, the statistical racial disparity, the deleted audio, and the high-profile nature of the victim made a trial impossible. They would be annihilated in court. On November 14th, the settlement was announced. The city agreed to pay Julian Vance $1.2 million in damages. Julian immediately pledged the net proceeds to a legal defense fund for victims of police misconduct who couldn't afford lawyers like Elena Ross. Officer Garrett Thorne was fired. Not allowed to resign, fired. His certification was revoked by the state of Virginia, meaning he could never wear a badge again in that commonwealth. He was also indicted on federal charges for deprivation of rights under color of law. He eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge to avoid prison time, receiving 3 years of probation and a permanent felony record. But the real victory was the reforms. The Vance Decree mandated that the Arlington PD implement an early intervention system. This software tracks officer behavior. If an officer has a disproportionate number of stops involving minorities or a high number of unsubstantiated searches, the system flags them for immediate review and retraining before a tragedy occurs. Furthermore, the department was forced to ban pretextual stops based solely on odor. If an officer claims to smell drugs, they must have a second officer confirm it, or they cannot search without consent or a warrant. Julian Vance is still with the DIA. He was promoted last month. He still drives that Audi. But now when he drives through the gate, the officers salute with genuine respect and perhaps a healthy dose of fear. Officer Thorne is currently working as a dispatcher for a private trucking company. He spends his days behind a desk answering phones, no longer wielding power over anyone. I reached out to Julian for a statement for this video. I asked him, "Why did you fight so hard? You could have just flashed your badge earlier, made a call, and had it handled quietly." His response is something that should be etched in stone at every police academy in this country. I didn't fight for me. I fought for the version of me that didn't have the badge. I fought for the 22-year-old student driving home from the library who gets pulled over by a Thorne and doesn't have a top-secret clearance to protect him. Authority without accountability is just tyranny, and if we, the people with the power to push back, don't stand up, then we are complicit in every injustice that happens when the cameras aren't rolling. He's right. The tragedy isn't that Officer Thorne existed. The tragedy is that the system protected him for 12 years before he messed with the wrong man. This story is a reminder that credentials don't matter when prejudice is in the driver's seat. But it's also a reminder that truth documentation and the courage to say no are the most powerful weapons we have. If this story fired you up, share it. Share it with your friends, your family, and especially anyone who thinks compliance is the only answer to tyranny. Compliance didn't save Julian. Knowing his rights did. Stay safe, stay educated, and always, always record. I'll see you in the next one.
Investigation officially closed. For additional unedited footage, remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for trusting Bodycam Incident Reports.